Okay, folks, you're about to hear some new music. For about a year now, for the run of our podcast, we have been using some generic but fun music from YouTube from Kevin MacLeod, some appreciated sort of free use music. But we figured the audience is growing, you know, the we're getting more in our groove. It was time we had some socialist shelf exclusive music. So I put out the call on twitter.com, see if we have any anybody to help. And the dirt mage himself, Drew Mason, put me in touch with a fellow by the name of Solo Monk. You can find his content at Solo Monk 256 on Twitter. Also, patreon.com/Solo Monk Art. And on YouTube, youtube.com/TSAL Collective. We got to talking. I got to throwing out some concepts we have, and he absolutely came through. I mean, he really delivered, as you're about to hear. It's fun, it's jazzy, it's us. It says socialist shelf, read good books and organize yourself. And that is what we are about, the show about good fiction and changing the world. Um, so, we really appreciate Solo Monk. We appreciate the quick turnaround. We appreciate his work and hope y'all go support him and hope you enjoy the music. Joss, any thoughts before we play the tune?
Yeah, mad props to Solo Monk, the solitary friar himself. He absolutely hit it out of the park first try, and he's also an animator. I actually saw this before he got into contact with us about the podcast. He has a really kick-ass animation set to one of Michael Parenti's speeches. Highly recommend you go look that up.
Absolutely. All right. And without further ado, the new Socialist Shelf intro music.
Socialist shelf. Read good books and organize yourself. Socialist shelf. Read good books and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
All right, welcome back to the new and improved Socialist Shelf. I, as
Woo-woo.
always, am Joss, and here is
I,
Jacob.
as sometimes, am Jacob.
As sometimes, yes, we are. We have to wear many hats. We have to wear many forms, many guises in our capacity as socialist organizers.
Something like that.
And yes, to dodge all manner of repression,
Of
of
crabs.
challenges, yes, crabs, exactly.
They do be
For
pinching.
they do be pinching.
Actually, I don't think in this book that they ever mention crabs pinching anyone, but
No,
one
no,
can
no.
presume they're getting pinched.
Oh yeah, they are pinching, and I ain't talking about Thomas. So
Hmm.
yes, this is the Crab Cannery Ship this week by Takiji Kobayashi. Kobayashi Takiji in the Japanese naming convention.
They ain't pinching. I'm sorry. Sorry that your terrible pun got me. They ain't pinching, but I'm not talking about Thomas. Continue. My apologies.
There was I ran into a guy at the farmer's market at one point. This is way back. Who was like, "Hey, if you drop these crabs down your pants, they'll pinch you, and then you'll dance like a monkey." And
So true.
I that
I
is
mean,
that
I guess
I take his word for it. I didn't do it for obvious reasons, but that's stuck with me for a while. As
you
indeed this
lost
book
an opportunity. Yeah.
as indeed this book will stick with me. So Takiji Kobayashi, he was a socialist organizer in his day in Japan, in Meiji era Japan. And I suppose in the same fashion as our three body episode, right? We have to get into the history of what's going on in terms of Japan's labor scene and in terms of Japan's history, right? In terms of rising militarism and imperialism, in terms of increasing repression, there is in tandem a rising wave of labor organizing, of socialist organizing, and of proletarian literature in the pursuit of disseminating these ideas.
Mm.
And of course, proletarian literature, a good way of explaining it, this quoted in Proletarian Arts in East Asia, an article by Heather Bound-Strike. Yes, literature was no longer to be a sentimental pastime, but an active participant in the development of society and the unfolding of history. You know, if socialist realism has a literary component, this is that, right? So, Takiji Kobayashi. He's born October 13th, 1903 in the village of Shimokawazoi, what is now the city of Odate, in northern Honshu. Japan has 4 main islands: Kyushu, Shikoku, Honshu, Hokkaido. Honshu's the big one. So his father was the second son of a small landholder. His brother Keigi, Takiji's uncle, invested the family's money in a business that failed. So they lost almost everything. So at the age of 4, he and his family moved to Otaru in Hokkaido to earn a living helping Uncle Keigi at his bakery. Now, Kobayashi had to work at the bakery right out of elementary school, right? So his family history maps precisely to a point in Japanese history where a whole bunch of smallholders, a whole bunch of independent farmers are, very rapidly proletarianized, right? Japan is very quickly modernizing, right? Getting in line with the capitalist West. And so a whole bunch of smallholders and farmers are forced for the first time to become wage laborers.
And I think just to quickly interject, I think that's also important to note how much that cycle vindicates kind of the Marxist theory of how capitalism develops. And obviously there are more complicated and different versions of it, and not everything is static. But it is interesting to see on the other side of the world a country that, pretty effectively was able to keep from being, controlled by imperialism, that was not turned into a colony like Japan, following a similar process of the feudal era, going to the capitalist era, the closing of the commons, the moving into proletarianization. I mean, it obviously has Japanese characteristics, and it obviously is, unfolding in its own way, but it's so interesting to see how it mirrors the West, and how capitalism really is the same no matter where you are, just with its own cultural characteristics.
Oh yeah, to move. I mean, of course, Japan has its own thing going on, but like the breakneck pace at which it sort of replicates the experience of the European countries, right? In all its fascinating aspects and all its ugliness as well, as we'll get into. So yeah, Kobayashi is born in 1903. The very next year, 1904, the Communist Manifesto gets translated into Japanese. Portions of Capital would follow 3 years later. There wouldn't be a complete translation until the 20s, but this whole time, socialism is gaining steam as the country rapidly industrializes in the wake of the Meiji Restoration. The shogunate's abolished, they open the country and stop having it be closed, and yeah, massive, speedy proletarianization of the working masses. So, of course, 1917 is the big one. The October Revolution happens, the USSR would be invented 5 years later. In the interim, 13 countries invade Russia to try and crush the Bolsheviks. Japanese troops would not leave Russian land until the Soviet-Japanese Basic Convention was signed in 1925 and Japan recognized the USSR. So all this time, Marxist works are being translated, disseminated as quickly as Japanese socialists can pull off, and this scares the shit out of its government. Because the years earlier, from 1905 to 1918, are referred to in Japan, I didn't know this, as the era of popular violence.
Oh wow,
So,
I didn't know
yeah.
that either.
Oh, yeah. So the Russo-Japanese War has just ended in 2005. Japan won, but didn't extract any war reparations. The economy is stretched thin, food prices are rising, labor disputes and strikes are growing much more common. And you have as well, there's a series of incidents in Japan's history where there are coups or assassinations that rock the government. 1910 is the High Treason Incident, which is a socialist and anarchist plot to assassinate the emperor. An essential figure in this guy is a guy named Shusui Kotoku. He's a big fan of Kropotkin. He's the guy who translated The Conquest of Bread into Japanese. He is hanged in 1911, and the incident has the There's some people who were involved and other people who weren't. About half of the people rounded up and executed weren't involved at all. It was just an excuse to get rid of socialists. But the incident has the Japanese state going, well, our police aren't enough, right? We need like special police, higher police. And so
We need
is
our own
formed
police with blackjack and hookers.
exactly yes, oh yes,
Yeah.
with blackjacks aplenty, as we'll see. And thus is created the Special Higher Police, or the
Mm.
Toko. And one of their nicknames is literally the Thought Police.
Mm.
So the era of popular violence culminates in the rice riots of 1918, and estimates of how many people participated in these riots, which stemmed from price gouging of staple foods like rice, they vary widely, right? Michael Lewis writes in Rioters and Citizens, Mass Protests in Imperial Japan that there isn't really a consensus. Guesses vary from 700,000 people involved in the rioting to 10 million. Which either way is a huge proportion of Japan's population at the time, 56 million people, right? I mean, imagine like 1.5% of the United States rioting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it would be seismic.
Yeah, it's also like interesting to be living at that time and to go from a very agrarian, economy where people are self-sufficient and, they maybe aren't always eating great, but they always have their rice. They always have their basic staple crops to being told, no, things will get better if we proletarianizing, and immediately your government saying, so, we don't actually have as much rice as we need. Can you imagine just how infuriating and just, I mean, among all of that, among the crushing economic whatever, it's pissing me off just to think about it. You can only imagine why these people would riot,
Yeah,
of course.
and you have the state saying, oh well, like I mean, it's like people talk about substitution effects when they try and deny the rising cost of living here, right?
Right.
The state's going like, oh, why don't you eat wheat instead of rice? And it's like you you can't substitute staples. You can't. Like it is astonishing to me how little things have changed in certain ways. So yes, mass rioting, mass strike actions, but the left is still relatively small and isolated, so there's not much of a political project sort of tying it together yet. But yeah, nevertheless, you have increasing tenant strike actions, labor strike actions well into the 1920s. This is the backdrop of Kobayashi's teenage years. So in exchange for working at the bakery, Uncle Keiji funds Kobayashi's higher education. He goes to the commercial high school. He graduates in 1921, goes to the Otaru Higher School of Commerce. So he's part of the proletariat, but he's also among people who are trying to educate themselves and eventually join the petty bourgeoisie. You might call him a professional managerial class type in aspiration. He compares the state of affairs later to holding dual citizenship, in his words. He gets into writing, he starts submitting to literary magazines, he gets into labor organizing, and it's a good time to do so because, remember Shusui Kotoku, some of his supporters, anarchists and Christian socialists mostly, found the Japanese Communist Party in 1922. Now, they're still around. They're the oldest party in the country, actually, though in principle they've abandoned revolution. I mean, their politics are good, right? They're stridently pro-LGBT, pro-feminists. They're against imperialism and the American alliance.
I recently watched a video they put out of an anime girl dancing saying, do you want higher wages? Unionize.
Yes, we need that energy, right?
I mean, whatever it takes.
So from the jump, yeah, they're anti-imperialist. They run a hands-off China campaign at a time of increasing Japanese imperialism. They get outlawed in 1925, so in fairly short order. So what's going on in 25 is that the Peace Preservation Law gets passed. I mean, just let that marinate in your head, or like Peace Preservation Law. Doesn't that sound ominous? So what this does is this criminalizes criticism of the kokutai, or the national essence of Japan, on pain of imprisonment for up to 10 years. And it's written broadly enough that can be applied to basically anything, but it explicitly criminalizes criticism of the system of private property. And it was enforced until the defeat of Japan in the Pacific War. Over 70,000 people were arrested under this law. The Toko were given much broader powers to do this. Now, this is the same year as universal male suffrage is implemented, right? So before that, maybe 2% of the population could vote. Women would not get the vote for another 20 years. So
it's fascinating
yeah.
because there's actually people who call this a period of liberalization because of that. And and it's such a weird dichotomy because kind of question mark, but they're also doing this like proto-McCarthyist, not proto-McCarthyist. They're basically doing a parallel Red Scare to the United States, like first Red Scare. It's fascinating.
Right.
The dichotomy there.
Well, yeah, because that's the idea. Like they're scared that, well, if we let the masses vote, suddenly they'll do socialism at the ballot box, and we don't want that, So back to Kobayashi. He's graduated in 24. He's working at the Hokkaido Colonial Bank, which facilitates investments in mining, fishing, farming enterprises in the island of Hokkaido on land seized from the native Ainu. Its literal translation, this was so funny to me, is Hokkaido Exploitation Bank.
I love working at the exploitation bank.
Yes, the first national bank of pure evil.
That's me like trying to write fiction. It always comes out that way. I mean, it makes me feel good when in real life there are parallels.
I love some of the literal transliterations that you kind of get from this. So he's 21 at this time. He falls in love with a 16-year-old girl named Takiko Taguchi. She's a prostitute, and this is really a pivotal moment for him because he realizes, oh, I'm attracted to a girl who's been driven to commodify her sexuality, and I'm working in a bank that's pushing people into those situations by doing land enclosure, privatization, seizing people's livelihoods. So he starts writing short stories about her experience, about the experience of people like her, those left behind, Takiko and others. And he really starts throwing himself into organizing in the Otaru Harbor strike. This draws huge support from workers riding high off this recent wave of tenant strikes. He's designing posters, he's studying with farmers and laborers, he's very active in the campaign of this dude, Kenzo Yamamoto. He's a member of the Japanese Communist Party, Yamamoto is, which, as I mentioned, is outlawed. So he's running on the Labor Farmer Party ticket, which is a legal left party at the time, but he's under JCB discipline. So Kobayashi writes a book based on that, Journey to East Kuchan. By 1927, he's the executive secretary of the Otaru Worker and Farmer Artists Federation, and so he's disseminating class consciousness through art. 1928, you get another incident, the March 15th incident. Big crackdown on socialists nationwide, over 1,600 people arrested. Roughly a third of them stand trial. Now, several organizations the Japanese Communist Party was proven to be involved with were disbanded, including the Labor Farmer Party. That same year, the maximum penalty for breaking the peace preservation law is raised from 10 years to death. Now, only two people, the Soviet spy Ricard Sorga and his informant, the journalist Hotsumi Ozaki, were ever sentenced to death under the peace preservation law. Now, this is in part because only 10% of those imprisoned ever even stood trial. You were more likely, if you were caught, to just be tortured until you renounced socialism.
Yeah.
And the word
Which
for
is
this
a
was
common.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah. Yeah, they called it tenko, or course correction.
And that's a common strategy in anti-socialist regimes across the world. Just get somebody to renounce, scare them, that sort of thing. It's reminds me significantly of places like Indonesia and stuff
Mhm.
like that. These like hardcore anti-communist regimes.
Oh yeah, whether it's physical brutality like that or lawfare, as we're seeing in the RICO arraignment right now,
Yeah.
like the state will try every trick in its book.
I also love to be executed under the Peace Preservation Act. Like love preserving the peace with like executions.
Oh
You know,
yes.
no double think there.
So Kobayashi writes March 15th, 1928 in response to the incident. It's published in the leftist literary journal Senki, which means battle standard.
Oh,
That's
that's
the
cool.
liter Oh yeah, no, it's badass. It's the literary organ of the Japan Proletarian Arts Federation.
Mm,
And its depiction of torture is what first puts him on the radar of the Toko. Torture, especially in Japanese proletarian literature, as I'm reading, it's big, right? It represents the red line, right? The horizon that the state is willing to cross,
right.
in sharp contrast to how it's depicted in things like 24 here, like something regrettable that's like, oh, well, somebody's breaking the law, but like we're happy that they do it to, do what needs to be done. No, no. In Japan, like from the jump, they're like, no, this is fucked up.
Mm.
Uh, a, a quote from March 15th, 1928. When Watery was being tortured, he felt a fiery resistance awaken in him towards the indescribably despicable capitalists. He realized that torture is the concrete manifestation of the repression and exploitation of the proletarian class by the capitalists. I mean, it spells it right out for you.
Yeah, he's one of those writers who will he will just say the thing. He's not. I love a good author that just is not particularly interested in subtlety. This is and nor is he nor does he need to be. He did not live in subtle times. Nor do
Who
we.
who was it that said that subtlety is for cowards?
It's a bit from Garth Marenghi.
Oh, okay, got it, got it,
Yeah.
got it. I mean, it applies here.
It's the author, the fake author Garth Marenghi, who's a Stephen King like
Hmm.
bit where he says, "I know authors who use subtext and they're all cowards."
Yes.
That's the same fake interview where he says, "I might be the only person you've ever met who's written more books than I've read."
Oh, that's a flex.
Oh man.
So, okay, the following year, 1929, Kobayashi publishes The Absentee Landlord in Chuo Koron, or Central Review. That's a really interesting literary journal as well. In the
Hmm.
1960s, there's this huge controversy where they run a satirical cartoon that has the emperor and empress being beheaded. There's a
Hmm.
huge uproar about it, largely from like reactionary circles.
Sure.
Um, Neither here nor there. So Absentee Landlord is about exploited tenant farmers in Hokkaido. It gets him fired from his bank job. Well, first he gets demoted from researcher to teller, then he gets fired. And it's because he names names in the book, right, including some of the
Wow.
bank's biggest clients. He's also briefly arrested that year. There's another incident, the April 16th incident. Um, I've seen one source suggesting that this was a turning point that led the Soviet Union to focus on exploring a revolution in China rather than Japan. I haven't delved deeply enough to really determine that. But Kobayashi doubles down. By late 1928, he'd started writing The Crab Cannery Ship, which
There
is
we
the subject of
go.
our episode. It is inspired by a couple of things. It's inspired by a news story he reads about workers on a floating crab canning factory. They're treated horribly and they sue their boss when they get to shore. He also reads a book by Yoshiki Hayama, who wrote a book a few years earlier called Those Who Live on the Sea. And that book was semi-autobiographical. It's written during a prison sentence for unit activity aboard a coal carrying ship. So, Crab Cannery Ship is serialized in the May and June 1929 issues of Senki. It gets a lot of attention. There's a theater adaptation that premieres in July of that year in Tokyo under a different name. The book sells 15,000 copies. It gets banned. It continues to be circulated in abridged form, but the full text won't be permitted in public again until after the Second World War. So in 1930, Kobayashi gets elected to the Central Committee of the reformed Japan Proletarian Arts Federation, which is now the Japan Proletarian Writers League, kind of a big tent organization of writers in the labor movement. He's arrested and tortured later in the year on suspicion of donating to the JCP. He's imprisoned in August. He tortured again in prison, released on bail in January 1931, finally joins the JCP in October.
Mhm.
Now, there's two other texts with the printing of the book that I sent you, Jacob. He writes them at this time. He writes in 1931 Yasuko, about two sisters who get into the labor movement. Following year, he writes Life of a Party Member, about his work with the JCP. He's giving lectures, he's raising funds, he's organizing all over the Tokyo area, all while being hounded by police. Now, from early 1932, he starts living totally underground. And the ensuing year, of course, it sees the establishment of the puppet state of Manchukuo, right after the Mukden incident about the false flag incident that leads Japan to properly invade China.
Mhm.
Um, this is what some progressive Japanese historians consider the real beginning of the Pacific War. February 20th, 1933, is where it all comes to a head. He goes to meet with a guy that he thinks is a comrade. It's actually a spy from the Toko. They beat the shit out of him until he dies. His lower body is literally swollen black from internal bleeding. And the Toko announced that he died of a heart attack. No hospital will do an autopsy. They're too afraid. But his work so he's 29 when he dies.
Yeah.
Just to give you a sense of time and place.
And he already and I mean was quite prolific considering his short stint he was writing because he wasn't even writing his, he doesn't get into writing until his 20s.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
no,
you,
he's prolific, in the short span of time that he's actually writing, and amid
yeah,
the backdrop of all the organizing he's doing.
it's
B,
remarkable.
he never slept.
And
So his work is around for decades. In 1948, the full text of Crab Cannery Ship is finally published in Japanese. And he has a fairly I mean, he has an enduring legacy in Japan. There's a film of Crab Cannery Ship in 1953. It wins Best Cinematography at the Mainichi Film Awards. There's a remake in 2009. It's on YouTube if you want to go look it up. There has been a manga version, a couple of stage adaptations. It was published in English now in 1933 as The Cannery Boat, in 1973 as The Factory Ship. In Japan, it sells maybe 5,000 copies a year until 2008, in which year there's a global financial collapse, as we recall. It explodes in popularity at that time. 500,000 copies are sold that year.
Wow.
Again, Japan's population at the time is 128 million. Nothing to sneeze at. If you
And not
assume,
exactly a
yeah,
time people are spending money for no reason either.
no, yeah.
Quite the opposite. They're pinching pennies, but 500,000 people saw it necessary to purchase this book.
Oh yeah, like if you assume that everybody who picked up the book read it through to the end, like that's one in every 256 Japanese people reading this book.
And that's provided they're not passing it around to friends
Oh yeah,
or
oh yeah.
libraries.
And it spawned expressions, right? Kanikosuru, meaning to slave away, because the book's Japanese title is Kanikosen. So there's a documentary about Kobayashi's life. There's a musical been written about his last 3 years. A library has been founded in his name. We, of course, are reading the 2013 English translation by Jelko Chiprish. I assume that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah. And there's quite a good intro. There's like definitely like in the version that we are reading, there's quite a good intro from him and then also just like on the thing on the text in general.
You're talking about Komori Yoichi?
Yeah, I'm just saying there's the bit that says translator's preface gives some like great context to it.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I highly recommend not skipping the opening.
Mm-hmm.
So the Crab Cannery Ship. There's a really unique character to the setting and the labor of this book, as laid out in the prefaces, right? So the floating crab canning factory of the title is not legally considered a ship, so it's not subject to maritime law. But because it's at sea, it's not subject to labor laws, right? Because it's not technically a factory either.
Right.
And it's operating in extraterritorial waters between Japan and the Soviet Union. So even were it subject to maritime law, it's not subject to the maritime laws of either of those countries. So it's this perfect limbo where workers can be treated however. And yeah.
I want to read a quotation from the intro that's
Totally.
like written about the book because it's very useful.
Mhm.
Context. Quote, "The Crab Cannery Ship was written on the basis of a painstaking investigation into an actual incident that took place in 1926. In a letter to, and apologies on any of my pronunciation, Kurochara Korahito, dated March 31st, 1929, the author provided a detailed discussion of 7 points concerning the novel's intent. First, its protagonist was not a single character, but rather a group of workers. Second, there was no depiction of individual personality or psychology. Third, various efforts had been made with respect to form in order to facilitate popularization of the proletarian arts. Current efforts in this direction had the air of a superficial intellectual attempt at popularization. This work, by contrast, sought to be overwhelmingly worker-like. Fourth, it dealt with a unique form of labor taking place aboard a crab cannery ship. Such labor involved a type of exploitation typical of colonies and underdeveloped areas. And it had the advantage of making transparently clear not only the condition of Japanese workers, but also the international military and economic relations constituting these conditions. Fifth, the novel dealt with unorganized workers. Sixth, it showed how capitalism, while seeking to keep workers unorganized, was ironically causing the workers to spontaneously organize. Seventh, even though it was said that the proletariat must unconditionally oppose imperialist wars, few workers understood why this was so. To meet this need, the novel had to touch on the economic foundation of imperialist wars, the machinery of imperialism that sets the army itself in motion, end quote. And
Well,
one wonders, and I'll make this joke once and not make it again. If his disgust with, after all researching into crab ships is why he got so into hot dogs. Kobayashi.
okay.
I won't make the joke again. Go ahead, Joss.
Well,
I had to do it once. I don't know.
Oh my God, I almost forgot. Ah.
All right.
Do you
What
think
were
they
you
make
going to
hot? Do you think they make hot dogs out of crab meat?
I mean, I think hot dogs might already. We don't even know what. I think they're probably made out of everything. You read. We read The Jungle. No, wait,
Mhm.
you weren't on that episode.
I was
But
not on that
but
episode.
I read The Jungle. I know that the hot dogs could be made of anything. Speaking of which, this book is remarkably similar to The Jungle in a lot of
Oh,
ways.
dude, the prose is fucking visceral as shit.
Yeah. Uh, Not just in the sense of, its subject, which it is. It's a highly researched book about meat packaging. There's
Yes.
that. It's about the most exploited people in a society in this, these people who were not proletarianized, who became proletarianized,
Hmm.
as Jurgis was, as an immigrant, who was more, living off the land. Not only that, but it also has this overwhelming arc of going through the horror and showing how it necessitates socialist organizing. And, I looked into it and I didn't see any evidence that this book was in any way influenced by the jungle, which I doubt it would be, the distance and the language barrier, and of course not that he couldn't come up with this concept on his own. It's very clear, but it is remarkable that these books, were written 20 years apart in very different conditions, and yet are sending a very similar message and talking about a very similar human cry of misery. Admittedly, this
Yes.
book is more proletarian oriented in a general sense, as it's not focusing on like a single worker and a
Hmm.
single family, which I think makes it very interesting. And very few authors would be able to make that work. And Kobayashi really does.
Yes, well, and I'm glad that you brought up the fact that, it's unorganized workers. Yes, right. And it's I mean, it's unorganized workers, right? These are not workers with access to socialist ideas, except for maybe some of the students in the book. But nevertheless, the imperative to organize and struggle against your immiseration, against these conditions, it transcends knowledge of theory. It transcends, indeed, as we see, language and culture, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the bit that we'll get into where they meet the Russians is my favorite part of the book.
Oh yeah. And in the novel, I mean, like from the beginning, and I say novel, it's really a novella. It's barely longer than a short story.
Hmm.
How many? I don't know how many words it is, but it's it's like a handful of pages,
Hmm.
like 60 or something from what I was reading. The first line is "Buddy, we're off to hell."
Hmm.
In to be clear, in this translation we're reading, which I thought it was quite a good translation. Um, it's right off the bat. Like everyone knows they're going into the shit. There
Oh
are
yeah.
different people who know what level of shit it is. Some people have done it before. Some people are fleeing other shitty jobs. Like there is a guy who is a miner. I say a guy, we don't have his name. Very few names in this novel, and that's on
Hmm.
purpose because these people are, they are being represented as a mass. Um, that is, I think, works on two levels. On one level, it shows how dehumanized they are as the
Hmm.
proletariat, but on the other level, in a subversive way, they are then able to form a singular entity. Once again, the tools used to oppress become the tools used to unify. It's very clever in that way.
Yes, yes, exactly. They are that single sort of amorphous mass that ideally can find some way to shape itself. And it's not perfect, they stumble along the way, but that's
Uh-huh.
the thing, right? You have to keep trying and you have to engage in you have to try and fail in order to succeed. You have to open yourself up to that possibility.
Right.
Um, and among again, the pros. I'll read from this first book here. You can really just immerse yourself in it. Steamships with red bulging bellies rose from the water. Others, being loaded with cargo, leaned hard to one side as if tugged down by the sea. There were thick yellow smokestacks, large bell-like buoys, launches scurrying like bedbugs among ships. Bleak whirls of oil soot, scraps of bread, and rotten fruit floated on the waves as if forming some special fabric. Blown by the wind, smoke drifted over waves, wafting a stifling smell of coal. From time to time, a harsh rattle of winches traveling along the waves reverberated against the flesh.
It's very
Mm-hmm.
the similes and metaphors in this book hit consistently. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
likes, a lot of what one of my favorites is much later, but it says the people are sleepy and their heads are not going back and forth like pumpkins rolling around. It's the level, like very, some of them even odd, like talking about like ship bulging bellies. If you're
Mm-hmm.
imagining they're pregnant with some like cursed child or something. Um, it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Yes.
interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, you didn't. You didn't. The Crab Cannery Ship is we're introduced to it in the very next paragraph. The Hakomaru,
Mhm.
a sailing ship with peeling paint, its anchor chain lowered from a hole in its bow that looked like an ox's nostril. I mean, and just to reiterate, like these ships are. It says later in the book they're basically bought from They're bought from like the army and other like private sources.
Yeah, it's like war surplus and like just shit no one else is using. Um,
Yes.
and they're not safe. In fact, an identical ship to theirs, like their sister ship, sinks in like the first 20 pages.
Oh yeah.
Um, and theirs gets very close. These are not safe. They are cheaply bought. And by a company that has no use for the workers, and in fact, insures them for a lot of money on the assumption some are going to sink and they're going to make a profit on that end. They're making profit on the front end, they're making profit on the back end. It
Oh yeah.
highlights over and over this is a incredibly profitable industry. And that's worth noting. This industry, because it is at the periphery, because the workers here are mostly like from, you know, not the main islands, not the main cities. A lot of these people are either immigrants or, displaced, sort of call them peasants. That's not exactly the right word, but like displaced, people who are living on the land. Um, because of that, they can hyper exploit them. And then again, because of the things Joss was saying, because there is no legal framework of regulation of this type of thing, which is, of course, very done intentionally. It makes the point that they can extract the maximum amount of value here. And of course, all capital seeks to extract the maximum amount of value, but due to the power of labor, and due to, things like optics and whatever, which they need to sell, there are certain concessions that have to be made the closer you come to home, the closer you
Mhm.
come to the imperial core. Now, those things get scrapped over time as capital gets desperate for a greater rate of profit. But because Japan at this time is an imperialist country, and because they have this periphery around them, and because they have this sort of mass of people that is not seen as like a member of the urban proletariat or whatever, they can draw more from them, and get more out of it, which is, simply the nature of capital. And just to be very clear, is what is done today, to a scale never seen in human history, right now. I mean, from the Congo to Latin America. I mean, we can go on. And I know listeners understand imperialism on a certain level, but it's worth noting like what is being done here is a process that is replicated in every system, basically, of production everywhere in the entire world in the global south by the US of A.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's global unequal trade. It's Niger um giving its uranium to France at garage sale prices, right?
Yeah,
What is it like? One in every three light bulbs in the country is lit by
in
Nigerian
France.
uranium. Yeah, yeah, in
Yeah, but
France.
whereas less than 10% of Niger has access to electricity.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
that is currently, as we speak, which is in 2023, some things seem to be changing, but that is a very fluid process, so I won't make predictions, but I will say solidarity to Niger in their fight for liberation.
100%, 100%. The troops are on track to leave the
Yeah.
country. We will see how that transpires.
And solidarity to the workers as they try to survive this shithole that they've been shoved into in the Crab Cannery Ship. Because holy hell, don't they like call it the shithole? Like the place
It's
that,
literally, yes, their quarters, they call it the shithole. It is filthy, it is dirty, there are bugs everywhere, like lice, bed bugs, fleas, just like visibly swarming
God,
on
the
every surface,
scenes just
inescapable.
describing them being eaten alive, and they're just like, are we just going to die from these bugs?
And
Oh my God.
frequently they do.
Yes.
They get diseases, they get malnourished,
And they're
like
not allowed
there's
to wash,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
which there is an irony to be surrounded in water and not allowed to wash,
Oh God, I didn't even pick up on that, but absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Water everywhere and never a drop to drink.
absolutely.
And Kobayashi, of course, interjects without even really disrupting the prose. I think he interjects and says, "Look, this is the background, right? This is the theory that we're working with from page 24 here, 23, 24. The task of feeding their families, he's talking about the fishermen, impossible despite working in the fields from before dawn, had forced
Mm.
them to come here. They had left the oldest sons behind, still short of food, and sent the daughters to work in factories. Even the second and third sons had to go somewhere to work. Masses of such surplus people, like beans scooped up in a pan, were driven away from the countryside and flowed into the cities. All of them dreamed of saving up a bit of money and returning home, but once they began to work, in Hakodate, Otaru, and other cities, they struggled like fledglings trapped in sticky rice cake until they were thrown out of work as stark naked as the day they were born. They could not go home again to survive the winter in snowy Hokkaido where they had no relatives. They had to sell their bodies as cheaply as dirt. Though they had done it over and over, they would calmly, if such a word is appropriate, do the same again the following year.
No joke, I had that exact quote written down from the very first sentence word you started with to the very last word. That's crazy. But like it's the exact condition they're in. It's like what I was saying, it's this very surplus this surplus population that the capitalists realize they can exploit a ton because where else do they have to go? They've given everything they possibly can, at the altar of capital. And they want, so badly to return to where they came from. They want to go back to this previous way of living. They want to go back to not an easy life of subsistence farming. They're like, God, don't you miss the days of subsistence farming?
Hmm.
Which I've actually been listening to Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast about the Bolshevik Revolution
Oh,
in
okay.
Russia, and you had a very similar population there of people who were seasonal proletarians, is what they called them. People who would go and work in the factories and then come home for the planting and harvesting. Um, these people, like, I mean, they yearned for the villages. They wanted to stay there, but they couldn't because every year they were being pushed out further and further. And because
Hmm.
everything got more and more expensive because they knew they could do that to them. So these people became more and more slowly crunched into proletarianization. Um, which, that obviously, like, that actually was kind of the key that was able to activate some of the peasantry in Russia. And like sort of these people became a branch between the proletariat and the peasantry in Russia in an interesting way. But in this case, this process is even kind of further along in this book, whereas kind of the dream of returning to the village is dead, right? Like it even says like they like swapped their land to like land that's just clay. Like
Hmm.
it's bad. They've completely ripped these people off. And it's them, their families, they are just scrapping to get by. And they are what I wrote down, a bunch of washed up people, hungover, visceral, angry, and traumatized. And through it all, the manager tries to frame this as some kind of nationalist struggle.
One of the few named characters in the book, the tyrannical asshole manager Asakawa.
More like
And
asshole Kawa. Am I
it,
right?
legit, no lie
Yeah.
detected. And he says in the very first chapter that it's better to commit honorable suicide than to lose against the Russians. He
Mhm.
mentions this recent Ruski craze. He's here talking about the Bolshevik Revolution, right? He says, "Look, don't try it, don't organize, or you're a traitor to the country," right?
Mhm.
Not the guys who are price gouging on food, which led to the rice riots. The workers are the traitors to the country by organizing for better conditions, for wages, for any semblance of dignity. It's not your own betterment that is your highest calling. It's beating the Russians at fishing.
And notably, Japan kind of is acknowledged globally as a superpower in 1905 when they trounce Russia in the Russo-Japanese War.
Oh
I mean,
yes.
it is embarrassing for Russia what gets done to them. And
Russia
so
sends the Baltic fleet around the world
they
and it
lose in
gets
the first fight.
annihilated at Tsushima in a single day.
It's unbelievable, like what gets done to them. And the thing is, Japan, so much of their prestige comes from that. So much of their power comes from that. And notably, that war was actually, as wars always are, horrifying for the populace of Japan. And there is actually very little war surplus that comes out of that. They don't win and say we get a lot of good stuff. It's mostly clout, which is
Hmm.
interesting because that is what they're still riding on. Even though since then they have fought with Russia again and this time failed to achieve their aims and overthrowing the Bolshevik Revolution. Admittedly, it wasn't a full scale war at the level of 1905, but there was still fighting and they were pushed back. And now Russia is modernizing at a rate faster than Japan after this socialist transformation, which is terrifying to the Japanese naturally. Um, and because, they are sort of scrapping for what direction do we go in? What do we do? They're highly militarized. What can they do but this sort of nationalist push? And,
Hmm.
they don't have much, if anything, but scraps to offer these sort of proletarianized peasants and these immigrants and these people forced to work in these conditions, but they can sell them on this concept of honor. They can sell them on this concept of like, you know, not God, it would be God and country here, but obviously for Japan, but like following the emperor and following, religious tradition
Hmm.
and hearkening back to this culture. He's even talking about ritual suicide. He's hearkening back to the samurai and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
They're talking about you should slit your belly and cast yourself into the sea. And it's interesting because this is the same thing that will be used um to drive the Japanese into Korea, to drive the Japanese into China, and to drive the Japanese to fight with Russia and, of course, the United States in World War II. And that we need not expound on what happened with World War II, but the sort of the death drive of this system that can offer nothing but more death. It's actually interesting. I don't give a lot of props to Orwell usually, but George Orwell in 1984 has, when he talks about the totalitarian state based out of Japan,
Oh, East
calls
Asia.
it,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, he calls it, their party is called Death Worship, and that
yeah.
is very similar to the energy here.
Yeah, it's a certain. I mean, we were discussing earlier about because there's debates in scholarly circles about whether you can call Japan fascist, and there's good arguments on both sides of that. Like, it's because fascism is, I mean, it's not like European fascism,
No,
right? It's not mass oriented necessarily. It's not meant for like popular consumption in the same way that that Nazism is. It doesn't fundamentally restructure the state. It just builds on the existing Meiji Constitution until the fall of the country, right? But nevertheless, it still has that strident anti-communism, right?
yeah.
It still has that inculcation of national pride based on this glorious past.
And it is still a drive because of internal crisis to conquer people outwards. And had they been more successful, they would have just kept conquering until they collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. And honestly, if you didn't even know the history, you could read this book and be like, oh, yeah, that's what's going to happen to
Mhm.
them just from the information here.
It is interesting the place of the emperor in Japanese history because like you don't
Yes.
to my knowledge you don't really see an effort to like become the new emperor. Like he's an institution in and of himself, and any fighting takes place below him, right? Oh, I'm going to be the shogun. I'm going to run Japan, but the emperor is still going to keep being the emperor. And
Right.
indeed, like I mean, the workers have that as well. Like there's a line in here in chapter 2 where they're like, the emperor is above the clouds. He can do what he wants, but if he tried that shit that the manager pulls, right? No, that wouldn't be okay.
At least until they have their mini Bloody Sunday. Which,
Yes.
because that was, I mean, to bring it back to Russia, that was a very similar mindset of the masses about the czar. They were like, oh, well, we hate all these other guys. We hate the minister of the interior or whatever, but we can go to the czar in the masses and give him, wait, what is this? They're killing us peacefully. Okay, well, it's 1905 time. That's what happens in Russia. And in this book, spoiler alert for the end, I love to say that, even though, like, obviously we do the plot. Um, at the end, the workers face repression from the people that are supposed to be their people, the Navy, the representatives, the forces of the emperor, and
Yes,
that
because
disillusions
of
them to the state.
the military tension between Japan and the new USSR, of course, there's a destroyer following them around.
Yes, that is important. It's actually interesting because it's a shadow, right? Because
Mm.
they are in these waters that are contested waters between the USSR and Japan because they're very crab rich. And yeah, this destroyer is following them around like a shadow. And notably, the workers are like, "Oh, hell yeah, it's the destroyer. Those are our guys. Those guys are here to protect us. Those guys,
Hmm.
they have this nationalist fervor." Because that's what they've been sold on. That's all they have. That's what they cling to. At least they think that's all they have until they realize they've got each other.
Yeah, like it's despite banding together like that, they're like, okay, well, there is this institution that's in our corner, right? There's something that we can go over the manager Asakawa's head and appeal to, right? Wrong.
Mm. Do you want to talk about what it is like to live and work on the Crab Cannery Ship?
Oh boy. It is maybe the most miserable thing that I've ever read. Like there's elements of it that I've seen elsewhere. Joe Abercrombie gets into it in his second trilogy, where he's talking about the factoryization of his setting. But like it's let me From time to time, the ship's entire body shuddered like a feverish child. All sorts of objects fell smashing from shelves, things bent and squealed, the ship's sides boomed, colliding with the waves. The constant throb of the motors ringing out from the engine room transmitted its vibrations through the motley utensils and sent mild tremors through bodies. Skip a bit, skip a bit. The chilling cold penetrated the laborers' clothing and turned their lips blue as they worked. The colder it became, the more furiously a fine snow, dry as salt, blew whistling against them. Like tiny shards of glass, the snow pierced faces and hands of the laborers and fishermen who worked on all fours on the deck. After each wave washed over them, the water promptly froze, making the deck treacherously slippery. The men had to stretch ropes from deck to deck and work dangling from them like diapers hung out on a clothesline. The manager, armed with the club for killing salmon, was roaring like mad. It
And,
sucks.
yeah, it's bad. And it's very similar to the jungle in a lot of ways. It makes me think of the scenes where Jurgis is freezing cold working the factory, but it's at sea too, right? So at
Mhm.
all times you could sink or fall off the ship. And in a way, there is the repression of the state, obviously, and of the like sort of the goons of the boss in the jungle, but there is nothing like this character of Asakawa in
Mhm.
the jungle. This guy he is fully bought into the bullshit. He is the representative of the company, and so he bosses the captain around. He's like, I'm the guy. I am he's literally cracking the whip. He's walking around beating people. He waves a gun around. Sometimes he shoots it in the air to show he can. When people disappoint him, he does all kinds of shit to them. Like at one point, he beats a guy like bloody and locks him in like a bathroom till
Oh,
he
yeah.
almost dies. Um,
And then they pull him out and he has to work.
yeah, immediately. And then yeah, just keels over. He's constantly threatening people. Obviously, there's double standards at all times. He's a huge hypocrite. He says we don't have enough water for y'all to bathe, and he is bathing every single day. He says we don't have enough food for y'all. Stop gorging yourselves. And he is eating good. He's drinking and like sleeping till past noon because of
Oh
his
yeah,
hangovers.
like company bigwigs come aboard at one point midway through the book, and they have the food to entertain these rich assholes, right? But
Mhm.
not to feed people decently. I
And
mean,
he's a goon in like in a thug in a like obviously almost cartoonish way. Like he is a representative of the company. Um, hard as it gets. You only have like one moment where you get inside his head and he says, "Wow, I need to stop being the kind Buddha to these guys
yes.
because they like get mad at him." And because they do a work slowdown, he is basically he is basically irredeemable. He is like pure evil. That said, in positions like these were real guys. Like they
Hmm.
find real guys to do these jobs. Like this guy sounds cartoonishly evil, but there are people who crack the whips in the world. And I would call back to Parable of the Sower. These people do the calculation where it says, what if the only options you were slave or slave driver? Which would you
Hmm.
call?
Oh yeah.
In a but hundreds of people, somebody's gonna choose slave driver, and this guy did.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's where you got capos in fucking Nazi death camps, right? People who would police and repress their fellow Jews, right? For some semblance of rising in this horrific hierarchy. That's where, I mean, in the SS, I believe, like they selected for psychopathic tendencies, right?
Mhm.
Drug addiction, alcohol addiction was not to be considered an automatic deal breaker, because they needed people who could like consistently numb the brutality that they would carry out.
And notably, after Asakawa puts that one guy through like hell and now locks him in the toilet and all this horrible stuff, the cabin boy and the student have a conversation about it. And the student, again, unnamed character, and this line gets repeated later, says, "This is not somebody else's problem."
Hmm.
And I like that. I love that. This is not somebody else's problem. This is
Yes.
our problem. This is live.
There is, the protagonist is collective in nature.
Yes.
I mean, other than Asakawa, there's, I believe, two named characters. There's Miyaguchi, who dies very early on, and then there's another character who's the one that dies later on. Yamada. The
Mhm.
other character, Yamada, who dies later on, and his death becomes a rallying point, a cause célèbre for the workers.
Yeah, you
Um,
basically get to be an individual in death.
Yes,
which
yes,
is
exactly.
interesting.
But aside from that, though, there do emerge personality, as in any struggle, right? There do emerge strong personalities. There do emerge leaders who have nicknames, right? They don't have names that we know, but they're referred to by, oh, this was the student, this is the cabin boy, this
This
is
is the stuttering fisherman.
the stuttering fisherman. Yeah, this is don't act big, after the guy who says that. So there do exist the sketchings of identity among these workers as they achieve class consciousness. And how can
And
you
it,
not?
no, go ahead.
Well, I mean, how can you not eventually achieve consciousness of your class when you have a guy with a fucking salmon club walking around going that, look, it doesn't matter if you die, but if we lose a boat, we're fucked.
Yeah, and they indeed do. Well, and they interestingly enough do lose another boat, like a full, or not a boat, a full ship.
The
And he's like,
Chichibumoto.
chill with that. Like they could go and save him. And Asakawa's like, nah, man, like we'll get
We're on a
money on the
timetable.
insurance. But when they lose an individual boat, like a fishing boat, he's freaking out because that is not insured.
Mhm.
Not even worried about the dudes on the boat. Notably, where did the guys go? Well, they had a brief run-in with some Russians. They
Yeah.
washed up after the storm on the shore of Russia, of the Soviet Union, and were, taken into a village. And Joss, I think you said this was your favorite part of the book. I really enjoyed this as well.
I love it. I love it. Let's see. Where's the page 45 to 46. They get taken in by this family that's living in this village, this like rural area. And a little bit later, I don't know if it's party men or if it's just Russian army dudes. It's not really that specific. But they have broken Japanese, right? And they
Mhm.
come and they tell the workers, "Hey, look, you're being fucked over. Let's see. Okay, I'll read an excerpt from here. It was a jumbled sort of Japanese with words out of sequence, scattering and staggering about as if drunk. All you, sure thing, no have money. That's right. All you is poor. That's right. So all you is name proletariat. Understand? Sure. Rich man's do this all you. He grabbed himself by the neck as if in a chokehold. Rich man's get more big. He indicated an expanding stomach. All you, no good, get more poor. Understand? Japan? No good. Working people? This. He frowned, making a face as though he were ill. Rich man boss? This. He strutted about. And that's again, he doesn't speak the language all that well, Of course they don't know Russian, but the concept is very easy to translate, right? The concept transcends language, transcends culture, it transcends, it transcends all these barriers because the experience of being sorted into these classes is more or less universal.
And I love the level of like explanation that these just sort of, presumably not particularly important Russians are able to give. And I say not important as in their lives are not value, but like these aren't, high-ranking party members. These aren't intellectuals. These are just people who have like received some education, who
Mhm.
have seen how their country has been transformed by revolution, despite all the hardships they've had to go through, including hardships inflicted by the Japanese,
Mhm.
notably, especially in this region, and that they're able to develop that solidarity immediately, first of all, and second of all, that they're able to articulate this in very simple terms, even with the language barrier, is great. It reminds me of, Ho Chi Minh saying the average Vietnamese rice farmer understands dialectics better than American professors.
Yes.
Um, and that's exactly what it is. And that also shows the sort of, I won't use the word enlightenment because of what that comes with, but the sort of the level of raised consciousness
Mhm.
that comes with a socialist society. Um, and these guys are able to take this back and people ask them, and it is funny because of obviously the movie, but they say, have you been turning red? Um, you know, he, you know, obviously
They
different
turn into
thing.
red pandas and they go back and they beat the shit out of Asakawa.
That's true. Oh, that would be awesome. But yeah, it's a quote. This, the men vaguely thought, is probably what was meant by the terrible phrase turning red. But if that's what turning red was about, it seemed to make perfect sense.
Right?
Yeah, exactly right.
It's like when you'll see on Fox News, oh, these people want healthcare for everybody and they want no more war, and they're like, you're making us sound really cool.
Yeah, yeah,
My favorite line, I'll just interject here, is
yeah.
proletariat number one great.
Proletariat number one, great. I love that. And that's important. That's the mindset you got to have. They then, they continue to go through hardship, but because despite these few guys having this experience, they are, they're not instantly having their little revolution. They're still going to be going through this. There's still misery and filth. And
Mhm.
I'll say the guys, it's notable. This is not a book where the workers are these like sort of valiant or perfect like Dickensian sufferers.
Right.
No offense to Charles Dickens, but like let's be honest that his sufferers are perfect angels, but there are no Tiny Tims on this boat,
Mhm.
right? These people are like dudes who are influenced by their society they came from and who are made worse for it because suffering does not make you a good person.
It just makes
Despite
you suffer.
yeah, exactly. They obviously hard drinkers. They're obviously very crude. When a woman comes on board the ship, several of them are very, obviously like lewd with her. Several of them are like trying to have sexual relations with, some of the younger people on the ship. I don't know if it specifies the age, but it
Well, a lot of the
implies.
workers are a lot of the workers are 14 or 15.
So when it says the younger, some of them are having sex with 14 and 15-year-olds, some of these adult men, which is obviously, no, don't need to say that that's horrifying. But they are and like to imply because they like want a woman so bad. Like it is, these guys are doing this stuff. They're talking shit. They're cruel to
Hmm.
themselves and to one another. That they're not all, pedophiles and harassers, but they're like these people are among them, and even like the kindest among them are still these guys who will in a moment scream at each other and fist fight each other if they get a drop of liquor in their system. They'll when they get an opportunity to see a movie at one point, they'll like scream every time a woman comes on scene. Like they'll like fucking do the wolf howl and say awooga awooga on a crackly black and white ass
They pull out a
soundless
mallet, hit themselves over
woman.
the head with it, and then their
Yeah.
ghosts come up and they're like, eyes pop out of their head.
Yeah, no, like that almost essentially happens. And which I will like mention that because there is like a moment where they get to have a celebration because of 10,000 barrels and like some company guys come through or whatever and they have like this moment. But even the movies that they're shown, especially the American movie, is a movie about the establishment of the West and the building of the railroads and like a
Hmm.
guy who worked on the railroad who works so hard he becomes a tycoon.
That's what you can
Um,
aspire to, right?
yeah.
That's what they sell you is you become part of this machine and you get to marry the like governor's daughter or whoever.
Exactly. And they're also selling you on this American mythos, which is like conquering the untamed wilderness, which is, notable because a lot of these guys come from the quote unquote untamed wilderness. A
Yeah.
lot of these guys come from the Japanese colonies. And to be clear, these guys are kind of like this movie's bullshit. Like they know that. They enjoy seeing the woman because for aforementioned reasons.
Hmm.
And they enjoy not having to work for like an hour, but like they harass and harangue the guy who's trying to explain the plot of the movie. They laugh at it. They say, "Well, if that guy thinks he's working hard, I work way harder." Um, but it is interesting, and also like it's notable. Like I wrote down, they're watching a movie about the ending of Blood Meridian, but like they're
Hmm.
watching this movie that's supposed to be aspirational, which is about the conquest of the West. In the United States, which comes with its own horrifying implications, of which Kobayashi is despite, his probably lack of access to, a lot of scholarly information and historical information, knows in broad strokes what's going on.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
this is a shot. This is he doesn't have a lot of time to talk with the United States, but he gets his shot in. And for that,
Yeah.
hats off.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, and indeed, later on, like it says, even the blockheads and drunkards see the wisdom in organizing, right? Because
Yes.
you don't organize with people because they're not blockheads and drunkards. You organize with them because they're exploited, right?
As Karina of the PSL, our vice president candidate currently,
Yes. Yes.
vote for Claudia and Karina, said once at a conference I attended, we do not support the poor because they are good. We support the poor because they are poor.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because when you speak of liberation, right, the first thing out of the mouth of some people is, well, if you don't have these people under control, like if they break free, like it leads to, rape, murder, violence, there needs to be some assurance of safety to the oppressor before the oppressed can go free. Right? I mean, that argument was used against the abolition of slavery. It was used against the overthrow of apartheid. It's been deployed to my face against Palestinian liberation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like when Kobayashi depicts the fishermen and all their sin and all their vice, right? It's again CLR James and Black Jacobins very frankly discussing the violence of the uprising slaves. It's the lingering shots of civilians and children in the battle for Algiers before the bombs go off, right? Liberation is messy. People are messed up by their conditions. And if you
Mm.
support if your support for the liberation of an oppressed class is conditioned on the good behavior of everybody in that class, you don't truly believe in their liberation,
Exactly
I
right.
mean, I keep coming back to the fucking Victor Hugo quote. Like, where darkness shrouds the human soul, there will be sin committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, it is he who casts the shadow.
Quote for our year, man.
Les
Um,
Miserables, very early on.
and if the indications are correct, quote for probably next year too. Um,
Mm.
and going forward.
What
But
did he call it? The cool zone?
the cool zone. Um, so basically the workers are starting to get wise between a few people's brief experience with the Reds.
I do want to
Between oh,
I do
sorry,
want
go
to
ahead.
touch on very briefly before we move on. Um, there's that line from chapter 3 that really sticks with me that like
Yeah,
when we tell people back home about this, they'll never believe us. I
yeah.
mean, that's half the strength of the ruling class, right? Is that these narratives don't emerge, right? Is that they control the narrative. Like I mean, you and I were both at the UAW picket lines, right? Like
Mhm.
down at the Stellantis plant in Morrow. I learned the workers were telling me, yeah, we don't have air conditioning in this plant, right?
Yeah.
And like
And
people
a
are
plant with like hot machines and shit running
Oh
in the
yeah,
summer,
yeah, and like
10-hour shifts.
in the winter they have heaters to a degree. It's not enough,
Hmm.
but like people are shocked when you tell them that they literally don't know. They don't know what conditions people are working in just an hour away.
And speaking of the hypocrisy of like the manager in this book, at that same plant, guess what the corporate offices that were attached to the plant had? Air
Oh boy.
conditioning.
Hmm.
It's real, folks, and it's here. But yeah, the workers are starting to get wise. They're not, unionized or anything yet, but they're starting to get frustrated. They are so tired, they start to do work slowdowns.
Hmm.
This, at first, is not a politically conscious process. This is just a few workers saying, dude, I'm just not going to work that hard today. And then the other workers saying, well, fuck you. If you're not going to work hard, I'm not going to work hard.
And it's
And
reflected
it
in the
spreads.
environment too, right? On page 57, there's steam blowing out of a pipe because shit's about to boil over.
Yes. And so at first they do that, and then they're like, wait a second, we can do this. And at first, Asakawa is able to like, whip people back into shape and push people, and he comes up with competitions between different sectors of the workers to try and divide them and like offer them things. But
I
oh yeah,
love
go
that
ahead.
like the prize for finding Miyaguchi, right? The dude who gets locked in the bathroom ultimately is 2 packs of smokes and a hand towel.
Yeah, it's remarkable what he like uses to try and divide these people. But because of his own like greed, he's not even able to like offer that much. Which is an interesting point. He certainly could offer more, but because he's so stingy, he's like, nah, that should be enough to offer them to get them to turn on each other. And maybe briefly it is, but not for long. And these guys start to have this consciousness, which leads Asakawa to put up grind set quotes around the ship. I wrote it down, but they put up it says a clumsily handwritten sign had been posted to the bulkhead beside the table. One, anyone who complains about the food will never become a success. Two, treasure every grain of rice. It's a gift of blood and sweat. Three, put up with discomfort and pain. And one can imagine those quotes like superimposed over like a video of The Rock getting out of a Lamborghini and just being on like an Instagram grind set page. And it's pretty much the same. And of course, this is carefully chosen because you have the rice riots not that long ago in
Hmm.
Japan, like we were discussing, because and because it is corny and silly, but he is resorting to the tactics he knows, which is
It's a
and
pizza party.
yeah, Exactly. It's a pizza party, but without even the pizza because he's
Mm.
too stingy to offer it. He's like, hey, don't you like the shitty, the shitty filth that y'all eat, which is like, I think it said like rotted fish that they basically salt so you don't taste the rot. It's unbelievable. While they're actively um gathering food for the masses,
Hmm.
notably, or not for the masses, but for popular consumption, they are eating like filth,
As
rotted
well
filth.
as a tithe to the emperor, right?
Hmm.
Even for this highest echelon of society, it derives from this exploitation that is ultimately just as tainted as anything else. And toward the end, like when people start really getting their blood up, it's like, you know what, fucking mix some rocks into the emperor's portion. What do I care?
Yeah, exactly right. And so things really, you're saying they're about to boil over, and then we have the death of Yamada.
Yes,
Um, Yamada is a man who dies of beriberi.
Barry
It's not a
Barry, yeah.
it's not a disease I had heard of. Is it basically scurvy? Like essentially,
Yeah,
it's a
basically,
vitamin deficiency, is my
yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, vitamin B1.
But he dies basically of malnutrition and overwork, which they are all, to be clear, pretty close to dying of malnutrition and overwork. Um, but he dies of it. The men hold a vigil for him, and it's like at this point that they begin to talk about organizing themselves. It's at this point of great tragedy. And to be clear, a tragedy that they all see very possibly about to happen to themselves that lights a fire under their ass, which this book, makes the point of how movements happen, which is, there is a build, there are people who are spreading, good the good word, like, like the student, like the cabin boy, like the guys who met the Reds. But it takes a consciousness shifting moment to
Hmm.
really, and honestly several consciousness shifting moments to get yourself into a revolutionary position.
Yes.
It's very well articulated and put.
It's beautiful. The scene where they have the funeral, the wake for the
Yeah.
for Yamada, right? And notably, like the stuttering fisherman finds his voice, right? He doesn't stutter once as he's giving this eulogy. I don't know the sutras. I can't console Yamada's spirit by chanting sutras, but I've been thinking a lot, and here's what I think. I thought about how much Yamada didn't want to die. No, to tell the truth, I thought about how much he didn't want to be killed. There's no denying that Yamada was killed. So who killed him? I don't need to tell you. You know who. I can't console Yamada's spirit with a sutra, but we can console Yamada's spirit by taking our revenge against his killer. I think that now's the time we must swear to Yamada's spirit that we'll do that.
That's exactly right, and that's what they're gonna do. And who is the killer? The killer is the company. The killer is the people who've exploited them, who are giving them the bare minimum, who are putting them into these conditions, and the killer is personified by Asakawa.
Mm-hmm. And in rallying around I mean, again, in death the workers have names, right? And in rallying around Yamada's identity, the workers reclaim their own and forge a collective one, indeed. And by chapter 8, like, leaders have emerged, right? They got slogans: better not act so big.
Yes, I love that. And they
Mm-hmm.
start to have coordinated slowdowns. The slowdowns that were once by necessity are now political in nature. They might not self-understand them as political, but they are now like to get back at, the company, and they are to, build up to their aims, to flex their muscles. And when they work together, they, no amount of beatings is able to get the work to keep up, and they in Asakawa starts to feel the heat.
I love how they wander into, those moments of consciousness and clarity, like without having read, without having done the reading, because again, you come to these consciousnesses through struggle, right?
That's right.
And you can find it set down in words later, but like, I mean, right at the end of chapter 7, I believe, the cabin boy says straight up, 6 or 7, the cabin boy says straight up, look, all these wars are fought by rich men for the division of the world and the resources. Like, he hasn't read State and Rev, but that's basically it.
That's exactly right. And at this point, we see the proof that courage is social. Asakawa can wave his gun, he can beat people, but if everybody around him is acting in a certain way, he's got to contend with that. And you can take that beating, or, even more extreme, the torture that, that Kobayashi will also talk about. You can take that in a social setting. It something that would be impossible as an individual can be experienced. You have consciousness growing in leaps. Um, at this point, the boat captains, the people who are running the individual fishing boat, have to decide which side they're on. This is kind of I guess I'd best compare them to like just like managers, basically. They do
Mm,
not own anything, right? They are getting paid maybe a little more, maybe a few more yen an hour or whatever these guys are getting paid by. Um, but but ultimately, they are still exploited. But they have to decide, do they want their position of being slightly higher up and slightly better privileges, or do they want to side with what is ultimately their class? And it says about a third of them side with the workers, and about two-thirds of them side with the bosses.
mhm.
Which in my experience, my limited experience with labor organizing, about right, about those numbers. When you talk about managers, I'm not talking about like corporate people, to be clear, but like, like shift managers and things like that.
Right.
Um, People who,
It's
to like be clear, are still the proletariat. Like, I don't want to. There are some like weird people who will be like shift managers at Chili's are not the proletariat. Like, that's insane.
right. I mean, yes, they are. Like they're given access to, more of the mechanics of, like they set payroll, right? They set schedules and whatnot. But
Some of them, yeah.
but ultimately, they're working with tools, given to them
Mm.
to lord over people and divide, right? And they
And
could
yeah,
go
the
either way.
intention is to
Yes.
drive them apart from each other and to
Mhm.
select people that will be the best stooges of the company. Um,
Precisely.
and then I want to read this quote. And it's kind of long, but I'm going to read it anyway,
Shoot.
about growing consciousness. Quote, one night a conversation taking place in the shithole, to be clear, that's where they sleep, took an unexpected turn. A boat boss happened to make a cocky comment. Though he was not being especially arrogant, the rank and file men took offense, and the fisherman he had been talking to was a little drunk. What did you say? The fisherman suddenly shouted. Who the hell do you think you are? Better not act so big, you fucker. When we're fishing out there, it'll be a snap for a couple of us to toss you into the sea. That'll be that. This is Kamchatka, you know. Nobody's going to know how you croaked. No one
Hmm.
had ever spoken this way. Now he roared it out in a hoarse, booming voice. Nobody said anything. All other conversation abruptly broke off, yet such words did not spring from reckless bravado. Fishermen who till now had known only servile submission, quite unexpectedly felt a tremendous force thrusting them forward. At first they were bewildered. Gradually they realized that their own power, whose presence they had not suspected, was manifesting itself. But are we capable of making use of that power? They wondered. Of course they were. Once they understood it, a wonderful spirit of rebellion filled their hearts. The very hardships of the agonizing work that had been wrung from them turned into a splendid foundation for their defiance. Now the manager and his ilk could go to hell. They were elated. This new feeling suddenly enabled them to see their worm-like lives vividly, as though illuminated by a flashlight's beam. The phrase better not act so big grew popular with everyone. When provoked, they growled, better not act so big, you fucker. They were quick to say it at other times too, but among the fishermen themselves, no one acted big. End quote. And it's just like, hell yeah.
Hmm. Oh yeah, no, you get so attached to these guys, right? There is incredible camaraderie that develops out of the misery.
They're the boys, they're forming up their own sort of, it's their own sort of union here. And they try to establish some structure. They try to establish some leaders that, and their plan kind of half works sometimes and not all and not completely. But because of these moments and because of consciousness growing, these guys who thought like they'd never be a part of this are sucked into it. And it says even as it grows, there are some guys who are like totally out that are like following because like this is what's happening now. And guess what? Those guys will benefit too.
Hmm.
Those guys will win too. And to be clear, those guys will then tell everybody that they were always all in because that's how it always is.
Right.
But at the end, what does it matter? Because they're all in. And this builds to a confrontation.
I love like in this last chapter here, right, where they're risen each other up, like it's so human, where they're getting together, they're making their speeches. Some people are ready and fired up. They've been practicing their speeches. I've been practicing what I'm going to say, like, and people, they go up and they have all these big pronouncements, and people are like, "Yeah, we get it. Move on. We all agree." Like, there's some people who have stage fright, and their comrades are, laughing and joking and making fun of them, but very good naturedly. Like, the Stokers delegate was the next to get up, followed by the sailors. The Stokers delegate began to speak in words he normally never used, and he grew flustered. Each time he became stuck for a word, he blushed crimson, tugging at the hem of his overalls, thrust his hands into holes in its worn-out fabric, and fidgeted. Noticing it, his listeners roared with laughter and pounded the deck with their feet. Okay, I'll quit talking, but brothers, give those scumbags a good beating. With that, he stepped down from the platform. He received a mischievously overblown ovation. He should have just said that last part, joked someone, triggering a fresh uproar of laughter.
Absolutely. And they get together, their leadership, you know, walks up and surrounded by the guys who are now on strike. They declare their strike and they confront Asakawa. And dude does not even get a chance to use his gun. They take that thing, and Asakawa, he's got a few guys behind him. He's got the captain who is mistreated. He's got a few of the boat captains, but for the most part, he's alone. And these dudes are bigger and stronger than him. They rough him up a little bit, and they're like, "Here are our demands," and they make them fresh out, and the people are feeling their power. And unfortunately, there is a small complication.
This is all happening under a brilliant sunrise, yes, but I love that change in the environment. Right
Yes.
off the bat that there is a sea change here, but yes, as you say, the destroyer is still around,
Yes.
and it's steaming toward the ship to put down the rebellion. Although
And
not
yeah.
so, there are people who see this intervention right away for what it is, but there are other people who are like, directly, look, you idiot, how the hell can a warship that belongs to the Empire not be on the side of the people who belong to that same empire?
Right.
Right? Because again, they're like, okay, we can go over the manager's head and appeal to these guys who know what's up. These guys who are also bros, presumably, and no, they fix bayonets and they charge.
Right. And here they have their miniature version that I said earlier, reference earlier, of their Bloody Sunday, of their moment where their faith in the institution, like in this sort of high level way, is shattered. Their faith in the emperor, their faith in the military, their faith in Japan as a
Hmm.
project is shattered. And they say, and it's an important quote, nobody's on our side except our own selves. And
Hmm.
to be clear, not my own self, because that's different. Nobody's on my side except my own self. No, nobody's on our side except our own selves,
Hmm.
plural, as in our class, the proletariat, which is the vast majority. That's a lot of people on our side. But we also have to understand what our side entails, what that looks like. Because these guys fix bayonets and they arrest the leaders. And they're like, I kind of got a little bit of a chuckle out of it. They were like, oh, maybe it didn't make sense for us to send our best guys and say, what's up to the guys with bayonets and get arrested
But
immediately.
that's what I love about this part, right? Because it's an immediate self-crit, right? It's
Yeah.
reflection on what has been done wrong and a resolve to do it again, but better.
Yeah, they manage to do it better. Um, but
And that's
but I think it's important for us to like kind of dwell on what happened there because this shows the position of the military, and in this case, kind of synonymous with the police,
Mhm.
with capital. This shows that the forces of state repression and state warfare, despite, how much we are asked to identify with them, thin blue line, rah, rah, God bless the troops, all that, they are from the top commanded to defend private property and imperial interests. And when the masses of people, a lot of them, by the way, former soldiers, according to this, a lot of these guys fought in the Russo-Japanese War. It says when they go up against these guys who are, most of these guys with bayonets from their class, in a class position, in a how much they get paid, where they were born, when they go up to these guys and these guys are wearing the uniforms and taking the orders, these guys are the enemy. These guys are their class enemy. And let's be clear, there have been plenty of, during socialist uprisings, moments where the soldiers changed sides and joined the masses. You kind of have to count on that happening to a
Hmm.
certain degree in a socialist revolutionary situation. But to understand the military operating as the military and the police operating as the police will always be against you, which is also part of the reason that you can't have, especially as an American or someone in an imperialist country, patriotic socialism. That's why it's
Yes.
antithetical to the project. If you have any interest in anything outside of your very immediate self, not in that case, that's myself, not ourself. And
Hmm.
they realize the only people with us is ourselves. And then they say, um,
And of course, once you do revolution, right, you can't depoliticize the army.
sure. And then they have this bit. They say, and these are quotes, these guys are talking. It says, no doubt about it. If we keep working like we are now, we'll really get ourselves killed this time. To make sure nobody has to be sacrificed, we all have to strike together. Let's take the same approach as before, like the stuttering guy used to say. That's one of the guys captured. The most important thing of all is to join forces. By now, we sure know how much we could have accomplished that time if we'd stayed united. And if they still call him the destroyer, let's all stay united and get handed over together without leaving anyone behind. That'll help us even more. You may be right, though come to think of it, if that happens, the manager will be in very hot water with the company. It'll be too late to send to Hakodate for replacements, and the output will be way down. If we do this right, it might turn out even better than we expect. It'll work out just fine. Besides, it's fantastic how nobody's scared anymore. Everybody's ready to take on the fuckers. Frankly, there's no sense hoping for some future victory. It's a matter of life or death right now. Well, let's do it again one more time. And then it's a line break and it says, and so they rose one more time!
Hmm.
Exclamation point. And that's vital. And and,
Yes.
and that's beautiful.
Yeah, not only that it happened at all, right, but that you don't necessarily know, you just know that it happened. The contours of it, how it exactly plays out, you have the broad strokes of what they would do differently, but you have to have that faith going forward that it will happen. The crucial thing is to reflect and try again.
Absolutely. It's amazing. And also just straight up how things go. There are losses. And guess what? Those losses aren't complete losses unless you let them be. The losses are lessons and they are steps forward often. I mean, take Russia, the example right there next to Japan, 1905. I mean, there are gains made, but the working class is, defeated in their uprising. There is not a socialist government. There is not even,
Hmm.
the liberal government they wanted after that. However, the people feel themselves flex. They see what they did wrong. They see what they did right. They see that it's possible. They see the czar is weak. And guess what they do? A little over a decade later, they create the first socialist state.
Hmm.
Um, and that also, that's on a grand scale, but even on a small scale, a strike. Okay, great. We messed it up. The strike didn't work. Let's do another strike. Like you could do it. And I love the point. It's awesome how, like they say, it's awesome how, like, we're not afraid anymore. Like, we saw it. Oh, that's what they can do. Okay, great. We can handle that because, again, courage is social. If you were by yourself and you were surrounded in bayonets, yeah, okay, you're going to be terrified
Hmm.
naturally. But if you were surrounded by the masses, ourself, as they say, it might be bad, but you are going through it collectively and it is for a higher purpose. And you have the capacity to win. And this book does throw in a supplementary note on the end, which is basically like a credits scene, like a where are they now post credits scene, where it's just like, and the strikers got what they want, and the guys got free, and the manager Asakawa, he got fucked over by the company and he didn't get paid anything. And the fishermen, the young workers, and their comrades were released from police detention. And hell yeah, rah rah, long live the revolution, basically.
And again, it's stressing. I mean, uh, I don't know if this is very critical, but interestingly, the manager was overheard crying out, "God damn it to hell! Those sons of bitches were screwing me all along." So he comes to some form of consciousness. God knows if it'll ever lead anywhere. But more importantly, this fourth point here, right? The fishermen, the young workers, and all their comrades were released from police detention and went on to engage in various sectors of labor equipped with the precious experience of organization and struggle. As arduous as this was, as much misery as had to be suffered through to reach this point, it's only step one. It's a long road. It is a hard road. It is frequently a miserable road, but it's one that has to be walked nonetheless, and it's one that can be walked, even crawled along.
Yeah, and notably, it doesn't put it in there, but reading between the lines, one can assume right after this experience, Asakawa embraces the immortal science of Marxism-Leninism and vows to make Stalin look like an anarchist.
Ah,
I'm,
yes,
I'm,
the all
I'm, I'm imagining Asakawa as a communist, and he's like, "This is going to be the most authoritarian form of communism I can possibly conceive." And they're like, "All right, calm down, buddy."
it is weird that because I'm thinking like the first guy to translate capital into Japanese ultimately went on to become a hardcore fascist, which is wild to me. Like
Yeah, it's bizarre, but so it goes.
some
Some
people
people,
some people are really into, the state for the sake of the state, right? Rather than, working to abolish class, right? Working to devolve the basic functions of governing eventually among the people and work for common prosperity.
look, Asakawa seems to enjoy his club. He seems to enjoy
Yep,
his
yep,
gun.
exactly.
We will, we'll find a position for him fighting on the front lines against the fascists. He'll do well there. If he wants to join the
You know
team.
why? Why cut off your nose to spite your face, right?
Yeah.
You'll find
Though,
some work.
admittedly, I don't know that Asakawa deserves a redemption arc. He kills some guys in this book. I mean, it's like they say, he doesn't kill them by putting a gun to their head and pulling the trigger, but as they say themselves, through malnutrition, through overwork, that is a murder nonetheless. It is a type of murder that is normalized here and in our society broadly and capitalism broadly. One loves to talk, people love to talk about, deaths under repressive regimes. And, notably, those things should be talked about. But people don't like to note our own regime is quite repressive when people die on the streets, when they starve to death, when they die for lack of health care or
When a
poor health care.
million people plus die of COVID because the
Yes.
government chooses to let it rage through the populace rather than engage in, hardcore targeted lockdowns, right?
Yeah.
When, you know, people on both sides of the aisle, to the degree that they are separate sides, say repeatedly, "Oh, the pandemic's over. Oh, the pandemic's over. Oh, you won't get it if you're vaccinated. Oh, you're immune." Like it's the fish rots from the head,
No doubt. And also, we could go on. We could talk about imperialism. We could talk about sanctions. We could talk about nothing pay for hard work that's going on, all across the world to even greater degrees than it goes on in the United States for the benefit of Western corporations. And we can say they didn't die, they were murdered. He didn't, when they talk about him, they say he didn't want to die. He didn't want to be murdered. And
Mhm.
these people were murdered, and these people deserve, not just their vengeance, but a world in which they don't have to be murdered anymore, in which
Right.
no one has to be murdered for the sake of another person. And of course, we know that that's not necessary. There is a part in this book where the managers are too hung over to work, and the guys work, and they're like, "Yeah, that was a pretty good day at work. We just like vibed and we got our work done." And there is nothing to imply that they didn't do the job fine. That's the interesting thing. I like that because actually the crab ship runs fine without Asakawa walking around with a club. Uh, they just, if they're allowed to take breaks and trust themselves and run the thing themselves, the cans get stacked. Like it still happens.
Yeah, the
Um,
club's
you
not
know,
there to make that happen. The club's there to make sure that, them rising up doesn't happen.
exactly. But one asks, the question isn't would the factory still be productive? The question is what would be done with the factory and its surplus
Hmm.
value if they were allowed to run the shots? And our answer, cool things, really cool things. Please let us do it. And if you don't, we will strike and eventually we will run everything. It's going to happen. It's inevitable.
Hmm.
So, this book, novella, call it what you will, I really enjoyed it. I mean, it feels weird to say I enjoyed it because there are parts of it that are just absolutely harrowing. We got into it just a little bit, but honestly, we could have dwelt more on it. But it would have. It doesn't feel like masturbatory in the book, but like it would feel borderline to talk about. Like if we went over every scene of horror, it would feel that way. Now it manages to pull it off in a principled way in the book, but it is truly horrifying. It is truly nightmarish. But this light on the other end, this particular style of writing, which is first of all just very good with all the similes and analogies and everything and metaphors, but also just making a character of the proletariat.
Hmm.
Very cool, very fun. I really enjoyed it, and I completely see why this thing took off in 2008.
Oh
Makes
yeah.
perfect sense to me.
Oh yeah, no, it was 2008. It was not 2008, you know. And what you say about making a character of the proletariat is exactly right. You know, it is making the reader aware of their of their station in the mass of people
Yeah.
and in the identity of that mass of people as a political actor.
Well, in kind of wrapping up my thoughts on the book, I also kind of want to make a sobering point here, unfortunately, which is just despite this, Japan was and to this day continues to be dominated by capitalism.
Hmm.
Despite amazing people like Kobayashi doing amazing work, the capitalist state was so repressive and so violent that they killed him and they killed many, many other people, of their own people and certainly plenty of other people. Good God, the things they did to China and Korea turned the stomach. Levels of violence comparable to what the Nazis were doing in Europe. And the struggle for liberation rages on here. It rages on in Japan. That's why this was read so thoroughly in 2008. That's why we're discussing it now. Um, and we can, of course, sit with the tragedy that the revolution was not able to be accomplished then, no doubt. We can sit with the tragedy of what happened to Kobayashi, but we also have to, keep in mind that we're still here. And guess what? The Crab Cannery Ship, their first strike failed. They were repressed. They were beaten. And what did they say? One more time.
There had to be a 1905 before there was a 1917, you know?
Yeah. And guess what? Maybe it's two more times. Maybe it's three more times. And maybe it's 100 more times. I don't care. It's gonna get done. And once it's done, it's done. It's going to happen. People, we will see the fulfillment of the promise of the Crab Cannery Ship. We will see the fulfillment of the promise of Kobayashi's life and legacy. These sacrifices will have been worth it. And all the Asakawas in this world, they will not be in power anymore. They will not have the ability to repress as they have repressed. As the Russians sort of said in this book, as they were able to mime, the proletariat is going to rise up. The proletariat will inherit that, and the boss will, I don't know, imagine me miming someone being very sad because he has to work like a normal human being now. Joss, do you have any final thoughts before we close this one out?
You were looking on Twitter today,
Yeah.
and the tweet is gone now, but somebody was going off accusing PSL of being Hamas or whatever, right?
Yeah, and accusing, in general, anyone who is standing up for the cause of Palestinian liberation, which talk about a people that say one more time.
Right, right,
And they
exactly.
and will get their freedom. And we are seeing the beginning of the end of the apartheid state as we talk right now, by the way, in November of 2023. But
Yes.
yeah, we saw some guys, saw some people basically saying anyone who stands up for the Palestinian cause and for liberation is Hamas.
Right, exactly. And I mean, First of all, of course, it's part of a united front, right? All of political Palestine has joined in, right? And they say, look, if we point our guns at anybody but the Israeli occupying force, right, everybody dies. So we got to, we got to set aside our differences and team up. But, quite apart from that, quite apart from the, ridiculosity of implying that this, liberation struggle has money to throw at pretending to be American socialists, right? The point that you made that I quite liked was, look, if we accept your premise that our organization is secretly these national liberation fighters that spend their time blowing up tanks by hand, your plan is to shit talk these people on Twitter.
People that just like 360 no scope $1 billion tanks just for like just on the regular and post themselves doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
You spend enough time. I guess my larger point is, you spend enough time whipping on a whole class of people, they will eventually whip back, and you do not come back from that. There is a point at which the whippers do not come back from it.
Well, folks, we appreciate you listening this week. Next week, we will be, Joss, am I right? Battle Royales next week?
Battle Royale by Koshun Takami. Now, of course, we know
Keeping it
about
Japanese.
Yes, we know about the Jacob. You laid out the sordid history of Japan. Its history of imperialism. The CIA funding the Liberal Democratic Party to the hilt in the decades since and turning Japan into a client state. So, Battle Royale is a dystopia set in an alternate future where Japan actually won the Pacific War. Whether they outright won against the United States, or at least fought them to a standstill, I don't quite recall. But it's in that. It's in a sort of era where the fascists, or the imperial cult, call it what you will, won. And within that context comes a very familiar genre to anybody familiar with the Hunger Games, anybody familiar with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds or Call of Duty Warzone. Battle Royale. What happens when a group of people, in this case students, is forced to fight over the scraps of what the repressive state is willing to offer? It's violent, it's gory, it's bloody. It's also pretty fun in its own weird way. So look forward to that.
Hunger Games? I hardly know her games. Now, please enjoy this new outro music. See everybody.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.